So where is your place in the city?
Here, it's on 911 Madison, Lila Frederick's old house.
Okay.
We used to have the twin at 915, and we were there for a few years, and then it opened up, so we just traded up to next door.
It's one of our major thoroughfares, Madison. It is,
It's funny,
Could be one of the-
moving one building down, it's quieter. You know, one building away from Lafayette, it's quieter.
it is sort of a strange thing, isn't it? How things, when you get away from some corner or something, things suddenly get a little quieter.
Okay, we're going to get the show on the road. We don't have quorum currently, but we can still meet and talk and all of those good things. So let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, is it Job or Job? Job, introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Joe Itzkowitz. I have property at 911 Madison, owned real estate here for about 5 years. My day job, I'm sorry. I used to work in Philadelphia City Council, and I always had to admonish my boss for not putting on the microphone. But I live in Philadelphia by day, and I am the executive director of the Old City District, which is the business improvement district in Old City. So responsible for sweeping streets, providing security, doing marketing and economic development, and we do a lot of vehicular and parking-related work. So we're actually just completed our parking study that we hope to release as soon as the graphic designer is finished with it. So thank you for having me.
And Job and I had a conversation this week. He knows,
Richard.
We would know Richard. I
He
mean,
knows Richard.
Patriot Parking, pretty well known in the
Yes.
city of Philadelphia.
Yep.
Richard was, as Bonnie probably told you, our expert in formulating parking recommendations that we made in our prior life.
yeah, back in the beginning, way back in the beginning, 2018, I
The
think.
before days.
So, I mean, in respect to that prior life, and Stacy's not here, so we're not going to be able to sort of forge ahead with scheduling anything
No,
with,
not yet,
with council.
not yet. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself since?
Dave Delenick, I live 10 Congress Street. Bought the property in 2017. Formerly, I lived in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, home of Yingling Beer, Dick's a good friend, and I was business manager at the Pottsville School District for 25-plus years. Now, my wife and I are retired and had some choices where we're going to retire to, but we chose Cape May.
And probably for a lot of different reasons, but.
Yes.
Cape May's a great place to live, other than their parking issue.
And-
Okay,
And traffic issues.
yeah, we can't officially approve the minutes since we don't have quorum. I would like to talk about the Jackson Street presentation, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we spent a lot of time on it 3 years ago. I made a few notes on the presentation. I didn't bring everybody copies. I apologize for
But hopefully
that.
you saw it on the email
Yeah,
transmission.
Tim wasn't able to open it, he was gonna look at it today, but, and I, just as I was gonna do this, do October 2019 and October 2022? Does that make sense?
No, but we can do drafting changes if you want. I mean,
Yeah, but I mean, I think that'll show the history.
I leave it up to you.
Okay.
There's some
From a legal
specific things.
standpoint, is there a problem?
I think there's absolutely no problem, and I think much more important is how we update the substance of the,
Right.
of the document than giving it 2 dates.
And I will update the committee members to reflect the current membership. You had mentioned in email that you thought we should add to the overview why we're relooking at this. And I added a statement under the last bullet point where it says, it starts with, this supplemental recommendation targets the issues on Jackson Street to improve the success of a comprehensive transportation system.
Well, I think that's the gist of it, but I'd like to have some leave to perhaps produce a longer, more complete version of
Well,
why
yes.
we're doing what we're doing. Maybe,
You are
maybe.
famous for your verbosity.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Sometimes people actually understand it. Maybe, and I think part of this stems from the idea that this committee, as it's reconstituted, has a narrower mandate than it did back in the 2018-ish
Yeah.
day. In that time, the resolution that created it was really broad with respect to its jurisdiction over parking and traffic matters, and gave us leeway to study a lot of things, which we did, and which resulted in the parking recommendations that we made, which resulted in the use and creation of the Jitney transportation system, and which did bring forth also the Jackson Street attempt that we made, which sort of said, look, we're taking this into our hands. So that's not what the resolution of 2022 has done. And so the object here is to how to, if we want to stick with Jackson Street, which is what we did in our prior meeting, how do we work that into the committee's jurisdiction? And that was, Bonnie, what you said was sort of I thought the key to get it, to get us in.
And remind me, and I will send Job and Dave, I will send you the presentation, the original presentation that we made to City Council with our recommendations that included the Jitney and the raising
The differential parking.
parking
is
main. Our aim was to make the, and it actually was Rich's, I think, I may have mentioned this to you on the phone, Joe, but he said, if you have prime parking and you want there always to be a parking space there, you need to price it accordingly. And so we only raised the price $1, and even that created a stir. But it's been kind of negated because during COVID, in an attempt to raise revenues, the current administration raised the meters throughout the town to $1.50. So there's not a whole lot of differentiation between the mall at this point. But anyway, the increased revenue from raising that actually paid for the Jitney. So it was a win-win.
And maybe it actually moved a few people, as it was priced
Yeah.
originally, and maybe it could have done more had it been priced even steeper with respect to the prior
True,
spots.
True, and Rich had said at the time that we didn't raise it high enough, but even raising it $1 was an uphill battle, so. Jackson Street, the recommendations that we have expounded on here was actually part of that initial presentation to the city council. So we then expanded it, because originally we had requested that they do a traffic study, and then we realized that probably wasn't going to get done, so.
Is that still off the table? A stud, yeah.
As far as I know, because, they're talking about lowering the speed limit in town, and at one of the council meetings, they mentioned that they decided they didn't want to do an expensive traffic study to look at that they just put their heads together and decided on it, so.
Well, we're famous for multiple studies of the same issue over
Yeah.
long periods of time. And I guess the approach was, for us, for Jackson Street, it was pretty narrow in the sense that the people who were participants in the committee, including one of our members, intimately familiar with Jackson Street and its problems. So I guess we took it upon ourselves to say we don't really, this is one street. We don't need a citywide expert to do it. We can see what the problems are, and there are only a limited number of solutions. So here's what we would propose to do that. And I think we made, there was something like something like 7, 8, whatever it was, in the first set of recommendations, right? And the Jackson Street was the study that we ultimately moved on to do our own work on. 9. none. And one of those was.
Jackson was number 6 on the
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, because it was recognized that that was a bottleneck
Yeah,
for anything that.
near
was-
and dear to Mark's heart. And essentially what we had recommended, and I sent an email to Mark today, I should have done it sooner, but to ask him if if the current view is still correct.
Guessing
Because
he's
I
not-
haven't walked it.
He's not showing up to tell us that.
Yeah. I haven't walked it, so, and I can do that before the next meeting. But the gist of our recommendation was to move the valet parking that currently occurs in front of the Virginia, because that's what causes the bottleneck. That and the delivery trucks. What we were recommending was to expand the loading zones so that the trucks wouldn't be an issue, and then to create smaller loading zones for the valet parking so that they could, but it required removing meters. And I know removing meters was not a popular.
Well, I mean, particularly because it cut down on free parking spaces. I mean, Jackson Street isn't exactly loaded with spaces, but you can't create a solution and open space without doing something to meters. I think that the view we took of it was that if you look at the southward flow on Jackson Street, basically the problem is the ziggy-zaggy nature of what's going on. You've got traffic starts off to the left, it gets forced off to the right by people doing valets, it gets forced off to the left by driveways, it gets forced off to the left when trucks are pulling in and out, and those trucks don't have a place to load. Not adequately, not all the time. So if you were going to do two things, you would try to keep the flow, the southbound flow, as straight as possible, which meant you had to put it on the east side of the street going southbound. And if you had to address the loading situation, you had to create more space. I mean, it seemed incredibly obvious as to what to do, and those were the recommendations that I'm forgetting the number of meters that were going to be removed. 5,
8, I
6-ish?
think.
8, 5, something like that.
Yeah.
It was a number that was significant relative to the, to the total number of meters that were on the street.
And we did ask at the time if we could get a revenue statement as to what each meter was worth, and Dan pretty much said he couldn't tell it by meter, he only could tell it by zone.
That might be enough information, though, if that block or 2 blocks is one zone, as long as it's not interfering with, like, the Beach Avenue zones or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't remember,
I
I don't think it's that one block.
No, it's not. But I do think that we were of the view that, yeah, there would be a revenue loss
Yeah.
from the meters. I mean, and that was the price to pay for smoother flowing traffic, lack of headaches, lack of accidents, lack of frustration. All those things were worth the loss of the revenues. I mean, we weren't exactly in the business of trying to lower the number of parking spaces, but it seemed to us that this was one instance where where that was justified.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that was really that was the thrust of it, and probably I probably ought to make sure that our new members of the committee can agree with the logic and the slideshow before we go
Yeah, well, and
forward with it.
I'll update it, and I'll wait for your,
Yeah, I'd like to take a crack so that people can't say, hey, what are you approaching us with this thing for? And I'd like to make the rationale clearer. And at some point, and this probably isn't the place to do it, but some point, I don't think that the continued function of this committee ought to remain as narrow as it was under the resolution.
well, I think we agreed at one of the first meetings that, with Stacy's agreement, that wouldn't just be the transportation portion of it. It would still have to be looking at areas of parking that we could direct the transportation to, or direct the people to, so that they could pick up the transportation. So I don't think it's as narrow as it's written. I will try and walk Jackson Street and confirm the current view, and I'll also confirm it with Mark. I will tell you, Job and Dave, that when we were structuring our recommendations, we did have visits from several residents from Jackson Street, as well as the manager of the Virginia Hotel. They were not happy with potentially moving the valet parking over to the other side of
It's
the
one of the
street.
few times we actually had
Yeah,
some members
people
of the
in the
public
audience.
show up at one of our meetings and
the-
essentially
Always a risk.
testify.
The residents were concerned because they were struggling with people blocking their driveways. And so we had discussions with them about buying driveway permits and things like that, which has been changed a lot by this council. So I don't know if they ever did. I do know one of the residents that came subsequently applied for a handicap parking permit in front of his residence. And he lives in a building with condos in it. And I don't know the outcome of that, because there was discussion about, whether that was going to happen or not. So I don't know what happened. But, so I will update it to my extent. I'll
Yeah, let me
expect
just
you-
try, let me do some language and see how, work it like a draft and see how we can make it look like we're coming at this from square within the resolution that we've been given to work with. And it's not just a make-weight. I think the views that were expressed were, if we're going to comment about a citywide and comprehensive transportation system, it would be a good idea to make sure that, that one of the main problematic arteries was addressed. Just like, if you were to say Pittsburgh Avenue was down to one lane instead of two with shoulders. I mean, that's basically, Jackson could be an important north-south route, and so that makes some sense. And none of us knows where the future routes of transportation is going to go, whether it still be jitneys or something else. But if it rolls down Jackson Street right now, it's not going to get very far in the height of the summer season.
Okay, next thing I wanted to point out, Bob Elwell provided these maps, and I was interested to see that its structures documented by the Historic American Building Survey. So I'm assuming this great big long list is all of our historic structures within the town, but that's not our concern. It just happens to be a source for a
Clean
map
map.
of the town.
I think this is just a selective view of, there are a lot, the HAB survey has a lot more buildings in it
Right.
than this.
Well, and I know the historic thing is, there's contributing, and then there's, definitely, but anyway, that's neither here nor there.
However,
The current route for the Jitney, which is our only source of transportation, existing source of transportation within the town, is that it starts out from the elementary school parking lot and travels down Lafayette Street to Madison. It comes down Madison to Michigan, and then it travels Michigan, Indiana, Massachusetts, out to Pittsburgh, Texas Avenue, and then goes right down Pittsburgh, and then makes a left on Pennsylvania, I guess, or Delaware, I guess.
Delaware first, because it jogs over to
Right,
Pennsylvania, I
and
think.
we thought they were going back to the Coast Guard base, but Stacy mentioned at the last meeting that she had changed that because she just felt that that added too much time to the trip. So they make a turn right before the Nature Center onto Pennsylvania and come back out. And then they head back down Pittsburgh to Beach, and then down Beach Drive to Broadway, and then up Broadway to Perry Street, and then Perry Street back into town. And they end at the mall. Now, I don't know, because I haven't seen any reports. I would love to see some reports from the current jitney usage and also the volume. I thought we were doing 3 jitneys, which is what we did in 2019, so that one jitney would wind up going towards town first, and the other one would go the route I just described. And then there was one going back and forth on Beach Drive, Beach Avenue.
That route that you just described is known as the loop.
It goes in
Because it
both
makes
directions.
like a loop.
Right.
Right.
So you will see a number of jitneys on Beach Drive because, you know, you have the loop going and then you have the Beach Drive Express, as they call it. So I don't know if there's actually 3 jitneys going or if they were only.
Well, there really can be almost anything that the city wants to order up. I mean, you should know that the way this works from a standpoint of structure is that on the recommendation that we have a jitney system, we also assisted the city in preparing a transportation agreement. So the city's dealings with the Atlantic City Jitney Association was done by a contract. It was comprehensive. It was a comprehensive contract. I've kind of lost track of where it's gone or who's administering it, but it was capable of being administered by the city manager, and it allowed the manager to order up, set a schedule, order up the number of units to be used, prescribe and change the routes.
See, I don't know that that is still in place because we had the Atlantic City Jitney in 2019, we had nothing in 2020. And then in 2021, they hired the Seattle City Jitney. And then this year, they went back to the Atlantic City Jitney. So I don't know what their.
We just don't know the basis on which they've been
On what
operating.
their
I mean,
contract
So it was a, you know, but at least it was there was a structured agreement that allowed for the city to get those resources and use them and agreed upon terms. But the whole idea was to provide the units, the criteria, the drivers, and everything else that would be associated with transportation. Administration of it really was the key part. And once we left that, and once they had it, it was in the city's hands. The committee didn't operate
Right.
the services. The committee just made the recommendations, and the city moved forward with its
We have
contract.
the flexibility as this committee to determine what the best routing would be. And if it would be solely a jitney, or if we feel we need to supplement it with other forms of transportation, we can recommend that. It's not our job to figure out how to pay for it. That's the MTRAC committee's job to figure out how to pay for it, if the recommendations are deemed valuable. One of the things we talked about at the last meeting, and I think it was in the minutes, was the fact that we kind of have 2 audiences for this transportation system. We have the people that come in and rent and, you know, are located, situated in areas that may or may not be walkable depending on where you're located. I mean, I'm on Columbia and I walk. Jim's off of Pittsburgh and he.
Two blocks, in fact, off, so,
Yeah.
so we don't walk very far, and if we were to do anything, the jitney would be very useful for us in terms of the loop route, or the Beach Avenue Express. if
Yeah,
you
and
wanted to
Dave's
say.
on Congress, and you said you walk most of the time. So it's, and I know, living on Columbia Avenue, the people that live east of Madison Avenue are using bikes, they're using electric bikes, they're using electric scooters, they're using golf carts, as well as cars. So, in fact, I know that there are a couple of people that park on my street that work at the mall. And the one fella uses a scooter to work. And then, you know, he comes back in the evening, puts a scooter in the car and drives home.
I'd say, Bonnie, if we've observed anything in the last 3 or 4 years, it's been the increased use of those smaller units of transportation.
Right. That's
great.
The low-speed vehicles, the electric bikes, the things that are powered, small and powered, has really taken off.
Which I'm all for, because it helps our parking problem. But it also causes nightmares when you're trying to navigate
Yeah,
the street.
and it's also something that, in terms of a city transportation system, you can't get a grasp on, you know, I mean, you're not gonna provide people with bikes, you're not gonna, I mean, it's just, you know, you can make regulations about their use.
Well, you could provide people with bikes. I mean, you could do a bike share system,
You could.
but it might be detrimental to your bike rental businesses.
Well,
Well,
it might-
they did have a discussion about that
Yeah.
a couple of years ago on council. with this current administration, and they didn't like the idea, because a lot of those, you can leave the bike wherever.
No, docked is the way to go, I think.
Yeah, but,
Because then you have to park it, and they don't get thrown into the ocean.
Well, and there's also another factor. The median age of people in Cape May County is the oldest of the 21 counties in the state of New Jersey.
except
And,
the summer visitors are not.
well, I mean, I understand that part, but for the indigenous population, it's declining slowly and it's
Yeah, and the
aging.
indigenous population is probably not gonna hop on an electric bike or a scooter.
Well,
They might be in a golf cart.
They might be a little bit
But,
concerned that you're spending their money by
But
providing
anyway,
these
the gist
resources.
of what I was starting to say was that, you know, we have the people that are here renting and situated, and they want to go in town, or they want to go to the other end of Beach Drive, or they want to go to Sapore, you know, and to get there, they need transportation. The other audience that we have are the people that are coming either from other of the shore towns or from the park, camping areas into town to do the same thing, to visit the center of town, to visit the restaurants, to visit the theaters, to visit, you know, things at Convention Hall. They need, and those are the people that we need to be directing to some sort of parking, and then make sure that there's transportation available from that parking.
Of those jitney stops, are any others function besides the school, function as a park and ride situation?
Yeah, well, there is an area on Beach Drive, and you'll have to I'll have to apologize for calling it Beach Drive. It's called Beach Avenue, but in my youth, it was always Beach
Well,
Drive.
that's probably the number 3 biggest controversy in the city of Cape May, because half the people refer to it as Beach Drive, the other people refer to it by its legal name of Beach Avenue, and the problem with Beach Drive is, put it in your GPS and you're gonna wind up in Lower Township along the bay, right?
Well, and the
So-
other interesting thing is, I have to tell you, this
Which
is
is
an
lovely.
aside, has nothing
It's
to do with
lovely.
parking, is Pittsburgh Avenue didn't used to have an H in my youth.
Really?
It was, ended after G. That was Pittsburgh. But there is an area on Beach Drive, and Bob Elwell actually did all of the legwork and the research on this, but from Philadelphia Avenue
East.
there, he discovered that after beach time, after 5 o'clock, after the lifeguards left, most of those parking places were empty, and there were meters there. So what we proposed was that they change the parking times so that after 5 o'clock, there's no charge at those meters. Now, we never really agreed that the signage was appropriate, you know, that people really understood that that area was free, but we tried to do everything we could to direct people to that, because not only Beach Drive, but I believe Philadelphia, but definitely Trenton or Reading and Trenton avenues, those meters are off. And then from Trenton down, there aren't any meters. But, and we talked at the last meeting about the fact the city owns a property on Pittsburgh Avenue that we had talked about maybe creating a parking structure
So
there.
The city actually owns a number of properties.
But they're
they're-
exchanging some of
One needs to see how the proposed swap
Yeah,
of
'cause we're not
land for the
exactly
police station
sure which-
is going to work.
which of the lots are being proposed for the swap.
But that free east of Philadelphia was our attempt to move parkers to the perimeter of and we didn't have much success in figuring out how to do it in the north and the west, but in the east, doing a free east of Philadelphia with several hundred potential parking spaces, or at least 150. Those were thought of as no loss of revenue, relatively easy to get to if you knew about it, which was another failing, and easy to service with a jitney that was running up and down Beach, or with the loop jitney that also covered Beach. So that southeast area was one of the prime focuses of being able to try and move some people out from the center of town, if you could only tell them to park there and they knew about it, and then take a 5 or 10 minute ride on a jitney.
And on the western end of Beach Drive, those meters go off at least on, I think, First and Second Avenue, they go off at 6 PM. But that area is so dense with motels and rentals and things like that those meters don't empty, like the ones on Beach Drive were emptying. So, well, of course, they were already being turned off at 6, so, people know that, and they've been parking there, so.
Yeah, I mean, the east end part is really the fact that you've got commercial businesses that are motels. Those people are largely parked, with the exception of some of the dining spots. Those people are largely parked in motel
street.
parking lots and on the street for the beach use. Once the beach day is over, 80 or 90% of those cars are gone. So when Elwell went to take his pictures, he was able to shoot down Beach Avenue from Philadelphia, and you could fire a cannon and not hit anybody. So that part was pretty obvious. I'd really like to see that happen again.
Well, and I think part of our strategy going forward is to work out a better education plan for the public. I don't think that has happened this year. There was the Jitney, the Atlantic City Jitney people actually worked with the chamber to put together a brochure in 2019, but that has never been updated or recreated. That is the brochure that's posted on the website if you go and look. It still says 2019.
Yeah.
And our experience in meeting with the Jitney people before they actually signed a contract, they were so anxious for this to work that they were willing to do a lot. They themselves visited almost every business establishment along the beachfront to let them know that the Jitney was coming and the availability and things like that. And that was actually somebody ran into somebody from the Jitney recently, and they were saying that was something that was lacking currently, that, because, a lot of those places, the people turn over weekly. The owners are there and the managers are there, but the people that are staying there are different every week. So you need a constant source of education as to how you get about town and where you can park and,
Yeah, I don't know any private group. The Jitney Association the fleet is independently owned by the operators, right? So they have their own vehicles. They adhere to pretty strict rules and standards in terms of the vehicle specs and their operations. So it's really a first-class outfit, but a highly motivated group of driver owners. So their willingness to work was phenomenal in terms of cooperation, and I think they really wanted the contract. They really wanted to get a foothold, and we're thinking of it as something that they would be expanding their services. I have to say though, my view of whether it's the schedule of the jitneys or the location of the stops or the publicity and the advertisement that's necessary to make people aware, I honestly think and it's nothing this committee can do other than make recommendations about how to do it, but I really think that needs to rest in much more effort made at the organizational point, at a central point within the city.
Oh,
The city is going to provide the service, but it needs to do all the things necessary to make sure that service works right. And we're just thin in terms of that.
Yeah, and one of the things that was the biggest complaint with the previous, I don't know if you were around with the old trolley that used to circle around Cape May at all. It was a big white.
You would remember it because you would be choking if you were behind it. It was like the sort of oldest thing that the Mack trolleys looked like, except that there was always black smoke coming out.
Well, and the Mack trolleys at least are colorful. This one was just a big white albatross. But it had navigation issues, and it also used the elementary school. It would, that was one of its stops. And its primary route was, because it couldn't negotiate a lot of the small streets, it would go primarily from the parking lot to the mall or down to the beach.
I believe it had an operator who just discontinued, was looking to detach, the business was never sold, it was
And
just
if you
discontinued.
shopped at the mall, they would give you a free pass to get on that. And the mall supported, they spent some money to support that. But we liked the Jitney because it was more nimble and a lot faster.
And cleaner.
And and one of the complaints about the previous one is that people never knew when the Jitney was coming, or when the trolley was coming. The Jitney has an app that you can go on and it'll tell you exactly where the Jitney is when they're in town.
Job, have you seen those apps in Philadelphia? Do they use anything, they use those?
I mean, Philadelphia's transportation system is not the one that we necessarily want to be modeling after. But yeah, finally SEPTA is starting to introduce some of that technology.
Yeah.
And, on their bus stops, they're finally starting to say, oh, 3 minutes till this next bus, et cetera. They're great when they work. They're great.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be an issue.
But at least the buses have schedules to say when they're, not when they're going to be at each stop, but when they're departing and arriving and, generally at different major points. But we don't have that, and I don't know if we can work towards that, but it's a thought that
Well, the route,
if we could say, like if we could say to people, well, every day at 5 o'clock, the Jitney's going to be here. And every day at 5:30, the Jitney's going to be here.
Or even if it's just runs every 15 minutes, let's say, then you're never going to be more than 15
you never
minutes.
should be
Right,
more
right.
than the X minutes away. There is a bus that starts in northern Manhattan called the M4. The M4 starts off near the Cloisters, and it works its way down through Manhattan, probably all the way to the Battery. I want to say that the scheduled running time for that bus, let's just call it, is an hour and a half. But in reality, it's a 4-hour trip.
Right.
Because of the crowded traffic and because there are an enormous number of people getting on and off the bus. So the average speed is like 8 miles an hour through Manhattan. I think that the problem with schedules here is, these are what, 14-person vehicles?
15.
15-person vehicles. And it only takes about 5 or 6 people to slow it up every time it stops. I don't know that you really could, other than have a goal to make them come every 10 minutes,
Max,
every
yeah.
15 minutes. That would be the.
And it is handicap accessible, so someone with a wheelchair will slow down the load time too, but.
And the apps were irregular, but mostly you could see where the
Yeah.
thing was.
Oh, I
it
had
was-
somebody tell me over the weekend that, they pulled up the app and they said, oh, there's the Jitney right around the corner, it's the kind of thing, so.
I think Jeannie's got to revise she's got the app on her iPhone, she's got to revise it as a new version or something on it that,
Yeah, maybe just refresh it.
Well, I don't want to interrupt, but my wife and I
you have
always.
to, you can interrupt because
Oh,
you're like.
No, but we always are discussing public service announcements, and we always say to each other that, wouldn't it be great, at 10 o'clock, the Cape May Beach Patrol announces you must leave the promenade, bikes and things like, but if there was a station, microphone at Convention Hall, and someone there every hour could give a public service announcement, the Jitneys are running, there's a band, the Beatles are coming to Convention Hall that night.
But they could do the thing a banner at the top.
Scroll.
Well, but just verbally, because you know how many people are on the promenade
They
every
could-
morning. I mean, just to announce something like that every day, every couple hours.
They could do the recorded loop at 15:30 or 15:50 a.m. for radios that nobody listens to anymore, where they would give traffic, and weather and updated stuff.
Tune into,
But I'm sure there are many people say, gee, that's a good idea. That now I will get the Jitney, or I will go to the concert. But
I really, again, I'm sorry to beat this horse over again, but I honestly think that a very dedicated and strong administration for the transportation system could push that stuff through. Not only hire the jitneys and supervise the routes, but make sure that stops are marked.
Formative, yes.
Brochures are done and handed out, information is disseminated where it has to be. I just think that's an administrative thing that would be part of any recommendation I would make. Strong administration of a transportation system.
Can I ask a couple, because I'm new to the committee, so it's a little hard, I'm trying to like sit back and absorb, but I do have some more global questions, which is, you know, the current directive is just about the transit system, is that how I read that? But I agree that in order to make recommendations on the transit system, you need to understand all of the,
Did you send him the resolution?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
it-
mostly
it-
just those 2 bullet points, you know.
Well, it's a number of whereas paragraphs.
Right, right, right.
Because the city solicitor wrote it.
Right, but the
and
directive
He gets paid by the word.
I'm an
But-
attorney also, so I get it.
So it's a narrow,
Right.
you know, I guess the need arose to address that. I don't know why
But-
they thought the parking situation was solved, because it doesn't, you know, it's like it never existed.
I guess my 30,000, and maybe this is the question for council, which is, what are the underlying goals? Doesn't seem to me that the underlying goal is about reducing traffic. There's usually a make town more convenient or support our businesses. So we did it in Old City, we were looking for ways, we did a lot of survey research, and we determined that everyone wanted more people to support businesses, to have eyes on the street for safety, and no one wanted more individually, privately owned cars. And so we developed all of our policy around limiting vehicular access while drawing people, which seems very much in line with what this committee is set out to do. And so, you know, some of my questions are about, do we have any of that underlying data of where those cars are coming from? It sounds like a lot of those cars might be coming from as far away as Pittsburgh Avenue, but really probably off island, right? And
Huge.
are we limited in discussing our transit options to within the borders of the city? Because it seems to
Yeah,
me that,
right.
you know, West Cape May has an elementary school. There's a school right over the bridge. I mean, there are if you're deep
We
in,
actually checked the school over the bridge,
Yeah.
and they said they didn't want us.
right. But there are parking
Stacy
lots
mentioned
elsewhere.
that, you know, like the birding place on Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
Has a parking lot. After maybe 5 o'clock.
Right.
I don't know, if we haven't had any discussions.
Yeah, I just didn't know if we were
It's an
limited
unfortunate-
as a circulator, because that's just moving people around whose cars are already on the island, versus being off island so we can draw people in without bringing their cars.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked, Stacy mentioned too, that maybe we could connect with the council in West Cape May too, because a lot of their people come to town too. So, you know,
And as you know, Job, we have Cape May City, Cape May Point, West Cape May, Lower Township, all below the canal. And so I think we've always thought of whatever it takes to tackle the issues of moving and parking within that below the canal.
Right.
And in fact, had we an operative railroad, you would have even thought that it could have extended to the other side of the canal.
I wouldn't drive here half the time if we had an operative railroad.
Well, that we won't have.
I know. It's a different committee.
Much as,
it
much
was
as,
one in my youth, and I
What-
loved it.
I remember coming here. My brother would come down and meet us here on the
Yeah,
train.
and we would take it up to Philadelphia.
yeah, and
Great.
it's really a sad thing, because it served a really important function for some small number of people, but it's.
Now, you had mentioned in our discussion that you had asked if we had done any kind of survey of the users or benefiter, you know,
Right.
of the transportation, and no, we have not. Kind of, you know, we have several members of the business community on this committee. So we listen to their input. And of course, we're all residents, so, but the actual visitors, no. And I don't know how we would survey the visitors, because some of them are the same every year and some of them aren't.
We haven't had traffic-specific surveys. City has taken surveys from time to time with respect to tourism.
And we had some old surveys and listed like how many people were coming in from like a campground, or
Right.
how many were coming in from, say, North Cape May or Wildwood. Or,
Well, that might still be applicable, depending on how old it is. I mean, that would still be, good data, probably.
And well, a couple of the surveys, for example, and, what are the most important reasons you come to Cape May? Well, one is to go to the beach, and the other is to go to the mall. So it's not like there was a lot of useful empirical input that we couldn't
Yeah.
sort of have figured that one out from the seat of our pants.
And
So,
I don't think much of that has changed.
But I mean, I still think I have the underlying question, which is, what's the big picture goal, right? I understand we have this directive from council, and that's great. What was council's goal in issuing that directive? What was their policy goal? Or is it just to clear the streets of traffic, to increase throughput? Because when you do that, you increase car traffic because people say, oh, it's easier to drive here, so I'm going to take my car.
if you can figure out what council has as a goal, you're better than I am, better than most of us. I don't know that they,
It could just be a response to complaints. People complain about the traffic.
It's
you know.
a response to problems.
Yeah.
It's no,
And you know
here's our
what's funny,
problems,
is they've
let's
been
solve them.
complaining about traffic in this town for all
100
of my life.
100 years.
All of my life.
Right.
And probably before that, even when there was just horse and buggies.
Is it okay if I ask just a couple other questions on some of the things we spoke about? We talked on the phone about whether the data would be available from Park Mobile. And Park Mobile is really robust. One thing that's different here is that you can't exit your spot for a reduction. So I don't know if in Philadelphia, when you can pay for an hour, if you're finished in half an hour, you can leave. And that provides, the parking authority takes in a little bit less revenue, and I get that, but then they get better data about it. But the other thing about Park Mobile is that they're able to do dynamic pricing.
Now, see, in this town, you don't get any money back if you leave before.
Right.
the time.
No, I'm aware, but it's only $1. I can live with it.
It's not like out of a $10 bill.
Yeah.
But if the goal for parking is to have, as Richard had said, is to have, and I agree, is to have one available space on every block, so that anyone coming in can always find the space, but you're also have a lot of traffic, so businesses are doing well and people have access to the beach. Park Mobile can create it, so pricing is just dynamic. So as the spots become more crowded, the price can go up until you're always able to preserve that one spot. That's could be revenue positive for the city, but also can cure some of the driving issues.
The parking rates in this town have to go through an ordinance.
Right.
So it has to do the political steps. We can't spin on a dime and say, okay, today, we're going to charge $2 for that spot.
But you could authorize dynamic pricing, right?
Yeah, and that's the point. That's an important point. You could theoretically authorize a dynamic change in pricing. That such an idea would, in this community, and with what we've seen and the struggles that were necessary just to do one shift in differential parking rates, I would find that very hard to believe it would, because it would just, people would say,
Yeah,
"No, wait
I
a
get
minute,
it.
you're gonna tell me that people are gonna pull in and that space is gonna go from $4 an hour to $6.50, which is theoretically possible. I mean, that would solve our parking problems, but it would be political nightmare in this town.
Yeah, it would.
Right, but I hear you,
great
it's solving one problem by creating another problem, but if that's what's offered, and say, look, this is the problem, here's a way to address it, and here's the policy goal of saying we want to have one available space, so you can always find a space, but it might cost you more to find that space because there's a lot of demand. Anyway, it's just an idea.
That's a very modern way of thinking.
The other question I had with the Virginia loading and the meters on that block of Jackson, are there temporal limitations on when there's meters, when there's loading? Is that loading 24/7?
No, we had talked about that. If
Yeah.
we could do, make it loading zone during the day and parking in the evening.
Same thing with the truck. I mean, to me,
But-
the trucks are really the dangerous part because people are always crossing that street in the middle of the block.
Exactly. But you know what? At this point, it's not really dangerous because the traffic can't
so
move
slow,
very fast.
right? Yeah.
If you're hit, it's gonna be below 5 miles an hour.
exactly.
But yeah, a way to capture some of the lost revenue from meters would be to have pay parking,
In the
because
evening,
loading zones would be
for instance.
limited in terms of time. The extra loading zones would be limited by time.
Okay, last two things. These have all come up, so I'm not introducing anything new.
No, it's-
The
Appreciate it.
the meters here are still these individual meters. And so the spaces are designated. And what I'm seeing, just from my own observation, I do drive in town sometimes, is,
Well, you have to get to Madison Avenue somehow.
but even once I'm parked, I will occasionally drive. I'd empty the beach box today. Is you see all these great electric vehicles. They are short. You know, some of these things look like they're 6 or 8 feet, and they're essentially you could load 2 of them into a spot, but it's not legal for them to park that way. Has there been any discussion of replacing the meters with just kiosks, same zones, same Park Mobile?
Yes, but the city during COVID chose not to do that expense.
Crowd people together.
I think,
No, but
I think it was like number 1 or 2
Yeah,
in
we
the recommendations, the
proposed-
migrations away from the dumb, steel-headed,
Yeah.
ugly,
yeah, because they're limited on programming.
meters.
You know, well, we can cut off you don't have to feed them after 5 o'clock.
Right.
Or you don't have to feed them before 5 o'clock, but that's about how they're
I-
limited. But we had talked about, like, starting on Beach Drive, for instance, and putting in kiosks and removing all of the meter heads. But it never got done, and they're still at the point where they need to replace the ones they do have because they're competing with the whole 5G technology thing at this point. So they haven't done that yet, and they're not gonna do anything with
it's-
the rest of the town
it's a sh-
until they
you know, it's a shame
replace
be-
those kiosks.
Is that burden on Park Mobile, or is the burden on the city?
City, that's not Park Mobile, that's the city.
Oh, because the
city's-
actual
city's
meter.
system
Yeah.
for
You
the
can-
kiosks.
I mean, it's incorporated into Park Mobile, but
Right.
Park Mobile doesn't control the.
The
kiosks.
irony here is that the increases in rates resulting in the increased revenues from the original recommendations provided, given the ridership, not only satisfaction of having a free jitney system, but it provided sufficiently additional funds to do kiosk replacement of meters. But when the rates flatten, and they're not this way, the additional revenues don't come. And I don't know that anybody, certainly nobody on this committee for the time we were convened before is a fan of parking meters. They've got 62 things wrong with them, and if you call the Duncan Meter Company up and asked to buy a new one, they would laugh at you.
Well, and
Because
they can't get parts for them anymore.
Right.
They bought a big truckload of meters from another town for like $1 because of the parts.
it's a sorry situation, and so the salt intrudes on, this is not just meters alone, but you put them out in a salt atmosphere, and they just totally corrode.
Yeah.
It's just the wrong
Which
solution.
is why they remove them every winter.
Yeah, this is the
Right,
wrong,
right.
absolutely the wrong solution, and.
What else?
And we should go in a different direction.
It's too crazy an idea to share in my first meeting.
Alrighty then. I wanted to just talk briefly about, I sent you these documents. They're aged, because this was something they were talking about in, I think, 2019, 2020. Although I do see here that there was a public meeting being held in March of 2022 about, and they were creating parking near their beaches. But they were also, you got these, right?
I did, and I'm so,
I
I
think
think it did, yeah.
One of the things I found interesting, and I have to actually tell you that, and I forget where I read it, but somewhere, state of New Jersey actually has a whole catalog about their, what they offer communities. Because the one thing I found interesting in here was that
It's
this,
$1 a bus.
they leased these paratransit buses, which look very similar to the jitneys that we use, for
No-
$1.
Notice how they call them retired.
Right,
right.
but, you
and
know,
that's-
whatever.
Retired means beyond their useful lives to the state.
Well, it was, the state would have been selling them to someone, so, but if they could lease them for $1 per bus, if we could lease vehicles, and I have to read through, I downloaded the New Jersey's Department of Transportation catalog, or whatever you want to call it, manual, and I have to look through, because they, apparently, I read it somewhere that they were offering help to communities to help solve their transportation issues, and they, in fact, further north in New Jersey, they actually help towns set up transportation. within their towns, some of the bigger towns. So I need to go through that,
I mean, like light rail and bus service and jitneys?
probably buses and
Yeah.
jitneys and things like that. I don't know about light rail, but, so, you know, if there's an opportunity for us to lease any kind of vehicles from New Jersey DOT, then, you know,
Well, I mean, they do, I mean, aside from the big regular stuff you see with TNJ, I mean, they do operate smaller handicap service vehicles and things like that. I mean, you see them, you know, whether they have a program of allowing them to be leased or purchased by other, you know, by municipalities, you can certainly find out. But that does throw you into the, you know, into the realm of picking up old vehicles and figuring out how to operate them, maintain them and operate them.
yeah, I mean, we would still have to hire the drivers, et cetera.
Oh, you would have to hire a fleet of mechanics. I mean-
Okay, I will share with you some pictures that I received today, because if you remember at our last meeting, we talked to, Bob Elwell was going to research if the city did own the property around the rail lines on the northern side of.
Broad Street?
Broad Street, yeah, and they do. There's an area right in here that the city owns. It's kind of a pie-shaped lot.
So are you looking north of Broad now? This is looking
This is,
across Broad?
this is the housing authority here.
Right.
And then this is the transformer that's located alongside the tracks.
Right, so this is Broad right here.
Right, bigger view. There's the
Okay,
transformer.
got it.
There's the,
East side of the tracks.
right.
So this is a track
And these are
signal
the,
control
this
box.
includes the tracks.
Yeah.
These are the tracks that the Revolution Rail uses,
Oh, this is the little bugger right here.
right.
Is it like 618 Broad?
Sorry?
Is there an address on the parcel?
You mean the lot, block
Yeah.
lot?
Yeah.
Yeah, without a zoning map, we couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
So this is the little thing.
Well, and this is
Oh, boy.
the people
Look at
lined
them
up,
all lined up there.
they're behind the Welcome Center, and that's where the,
Jeez.
because
Like
part of our
sharpened
discussion at the
cards.
last meeting was the fact that the city is going to gain some parking spaces in the Welcome Center parking lot. We've been fighting for this since 2014. But part of the stipulation was we're losing this section because we had to leave areas for the Revolution Rail to store their vehicles.
So people get on these little pedalos and they
Yep, and they
pedal down
pedal
the
away.
tracks, and how they come back? You shift them in reverse?
I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
And people rave about it. They said it's really fun. They do it to the canal because that's as far as they can go.
Well, until they fall off the track.
Well, true.
The tracks are unsafe.
So, we can have a future discussion on this, but it would, and apparently Bob talked
Rubber
to
wheels, isn't it?
Lou Belasco today. And Lou was excited about this because he's all for it, but it would take somebody sitting down with the fella that owns this business,
Well, you know who that is,
yes,
right?
to,
The guy we should have dispossessed years ago. He's an unauthorized, as I understand it,
no, it's not McCray.
he's an unauthorized contractor with McCray. McCray doesn't have the authority to put anybody else on those rails.
Okay, we can't have that discussion, but, you know, because we don't have enough information. But the fellow owns the business, owns the franchise. So if we could convince him to park his vehicles on the other side of Broad Street, and there is like shaded area for his clients to wait before and I think they pay online. It's not like, you know, he's collecting tickets or anything at the spot. But again, it's going to take a discussion because part of the contract that's been created currently authorizes his use of those tracks behind the Welcome Center.
Are you talking about the track agreement, the 1996 or 91, or are you talking about something new?
No, we're talking about a new one. That,
And you've seen it?
no, but they've spoken to it at the council meetings. But part of the agreement, because So that limits the volume of parking spaces that we can put in there because they have to leave. And Department of Transportation came down and said that they could not pave over any of the rails. They can pave between them, but they can't pave over them. So it's, it's a never-ending nightmare, but it cut, I think, in half the number of parking spots.
Because
that
of the need to keep the rails in place?
No, to have his equipment.
Oh,
somewhere.
yeah, the equipment on the south side of Broad Street completely interferes with the idea of having a parking
Exactly.
lot.
So if we could talk him into doing that, but
This is part of our
that's not going to happen overnight.
our program of finding every little parking space we can find.
So that's just food for thought. And if you want to see the pictures.
That'll be great, thanks.
I'll pass more.
Just tell me, what was,
Really well
what was council's reaction to the proposal of Jackson Street, or did that COVID hit and then that's as far as it went? Or
The-
did council give response?
And the two members who are still currently on the council,
Right?
one was opposed to removing the parking meters,
Oh, really? Okay.
and the other one was hearing the
Complaints.
complaints from
From the
the
neighbors, people who live
live there, people, property owners.
there. Oh, okay,
It-
but that,
You
And we don't know whether
you'll
that-
probably get
the
more
majority
accustomed,
would have,
you probably become more accustomed to the fact that a lot of tempest can be stirred up in a little teapot, which is typical of what happens in
Yeah.
Cape May. It doesn't take much to
Right.
derail an otherwise sound.
because that
idea.
looked like a good plan there, that for Jackson.
Well, you could have tried it to see if it worked, instead of saying, oh, well, I'm sorry that you don't want
Yeah.
your valet
Yeah,
moved, or
absolutely.
that we're gonna lose 7 or 8 meters
Sure.
for a year while we try it out. I mean, it just, the answer is it just foundered. We made the
Okay.
presentation, all those sort of things were said, and then nothing happened.
Okay,
And, we made it in October. They were into budget discussions at that point, and then, not long after the beginning of the year is when COVID hit. And so the budget got,
So we made it in the fall of 19, right? Yeah, that's October 2019.
and then in March of 2020, we were shut down.
Yeah, well, but March of
We
2020.
met in February of 2020.
And then in November of 2020,
19?
no, 2020, the council changed
Oh, true.
radically,
Well,
radically.
January, they
Yeah.
changed,
Yeah.
January of 2021.
so we were discussing perhaps submitting that again if we were from more, okay, because that's great.
Just to see
It's a-
how it will sit,
It's one example.
Stacy's comment was there's, new members of the committee,
Yeah.
so.
Well, that's good.
And
Possibility.
you were here when Mark made his,
sure.
yeah, sure. When Mark Kulkowitz made his impassioned speech with respect to trying this again. Mark's family are the proprietors of the Mad Hatter.
Okay, anybody else have any comments, thoughts, suggestions, directions?
Going to continue to do this as a every other week thing, or we
That's-
keep aiming
yeah.
for that?
No, it's supposed to be first and third Wednesdays at 5:15, as long as Stacy is the liaison, because she needs the 5:15 for travel time.
What's so great about 5:15 is you can actually find a parking space outside
Exactly.
City Hall,
Yeah.
as opposed to the HPC meeting at 6 o'clock on Monday when I couldn't find a space in the neighborhood.
If there are no other,
Can I move to adjourn this informal meeting?
yes, you may. Yeah,
Madam Chair.
and we will meet again, and let me turn off the